Hey guys, what is up? It is me, Pagey, here once again with another video on just the Arrowverse and DC TV as a whole. And as we know, one of the pillars of the Arrowverse fandom was of course that of the annual crossover happening around episode 8 or 9 of the respective show's seasons, depending on what year it was, of course that being every season. This starting all the way back officially in The Flash Season 1 and Arrow Season 3, though some would argue it could have technically started in Arrow Season 2 when Barry Allen shows up for those two episodes, that being episode 8 and 9 of Season 2, but the following year, after The Flash's premiere and has its own show, that's what I would count as the official first crossover in the Arrowverse. Of course, these starting with just two shows, Arrow and The Flash, but growing year on year to the point of Crisis on Infinite Earths, where there were 5 episodes across Arrow, The Flash, Supergirl, Legends of Tomorrow, and of course, Batwoman. But also including a show like Black Lightning in there as well as other various DC shows and films from the past and present at the time. But one thing that Crisis on Infinite Earths ended outside of the multiverse as we knew it was the annual crossover. It was the final one. And yes, the big reason for it, the main reason, was of course COVID. If COVID didn't happen, there would have been another crossover. But because of COVID ruling out the crossovers for 1 year, that following year then led to Supergirl ending its run as a show after 6 seasons. Arrow, of course, it ended as well. But Superman Lois would have been a show coming to fill in the void, and you could easily fold it in Stargirl as well if you wanted to, but it just really never progressed. Many feeling that year off from the crossovers during COVID just halted momentum. But without being all, doom and gloom in this video, reminiscing on the reasons why we didn't get it, let's focus on what could have been. And as you'd expect, there were many theories and predictions in regards to what the follow-up crossover to Crisis on Infinite Earths could have been. We were, now all on Earth Prime with the heroes we had participating through Crisis. We had the Justice League set up, headquarters and all, so it was arguably the cleanest setup for just jumping straight into a crossover and having fun with what we, could do, ever had, from what had happened previously. This is probably the one where you just go, here's a villain, we all jump in, there's a crossover. But before we dive into what hypothetically could have taken place following on from Crisis in this follow-up crossover, what did we actually know about this cancelled crossover that never was? Well, the only real quote that we ever got, though there have been things brought up at fan conventions and stuff when talking to the various actors that were involved, but the only official proper quote we got was from Mark Guggenheim, who of course is more commonly known as a showrunner on Arrow and one of the executive producers on Legends of Tomorrow, but he was the showrunner, if you want to put it, or lead producer and writer on the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover, and this is what he said about the follow-up crossover to Crisis shortly after it ended. Look, I hate comparisons to Avengers Endgame because it's just not fair. We're working with Endgame's catering budget, but Marvel didn't follow up Endgame with Endgame 2. I think you've got to build up to an event of this kind. The one thing we're all in agreement on, cast, crew, executives, you name it, is that we're not going to go as big next year. In fact, Mark Pedowitz, who was CEO of the CW at the time, and I were talking about returning to the roots of our crossovers, and I'll leave it to people to interpret what that means. So in regards to the interpretation, what do you take from that to then think about what could have been? Well, for me, 2 things. That you, 1, have to build up to something the size of Crisis on Infinite Earths and its scale, which leads to them saying what they were talking about in regards to returning to the roots of the crossovers and, not necessarily the first one, but just what, the core of them, if you really want to put it. And you might be wondering, okay, well, what is that? Well, to me, that is pretty simple. It's the characters interacting, and that being what you're watching for. Once we get to things like Crisis on Earth X, Crisis on Infinite Earths, you're watching for that storyline, how epic and big it could get, and see where it would take us, the audience, as well as how it would end maybe, and how it would impact things going forward with certain characters, or in the example of Infinite Earths, the universe and all the shows as a whole. But I think crossovers like Invasion, if you really want to put it, something like Elseworlds especially, and also those early crossovers just between Arrow and The Flash, it was about watching the characters just hang out that normally wouldn't, or just never had previously, like seeing Cisco interacting with Winn from Supergirl, or someone from the Legends, or whatever it is that they might have picked up along the way, not from one of the other shows. Or even just simply just seeing Barry Allen and Oliver Queen and Kara Danvers and whoever it is hanging out, because you don't get that week to week. You sometimes only got that once a year during those crossovers. And I think that is what the next crossover really would have focused in on, but you might be wondering, okay, well, in what way? Because we've already seen it before. Now, as I've probably titled the video most likely, I feel like a Justice League crossover would be the way to go. So scale it down, both in size with the scope of the threat, but also maybe the supporting cast and really just focusing in on the dynamic of those League members, which of course would have been The Flash, Supergirl, Superman, Martian Manhunter, White Canary, Black Lightning, and Batwoman. So every show is covered. White Canary from Legends, Batwoman from, of course, Batwoman, Black Lightning from Black Lightning, Supergirl would have been there from Supergirl, Superman and Lois would have been on at the time, so there's Superman, also Martian Manhunter from Supergirl, and then of course The Flash. Every show would have been covered because at that point, or this point, Arrow would have been done. And while they don't have to make the villain someone smaller like this random metahuman or something like that, which now requires the entire Justice League, now including Superman, to take them down, they just don't make it this like over the top multiversal adventure where with one push of the button all of humanity is destroyed. But I think they could have done something pretty cool just with the Justice League members getting used to working consistently as a team together and on the same Earth. Now, it doesn't mean you necessarily don't have some of the supporting characters show up. It's just not like in the crossovers before where you'd spend a decent amount of time with them or they'd have their own side plot or something and then you'd cut back to like your main heroes of the Flash, Arrow, Supergirl and stuff. Pretty much all your time is spent with the Justice League members. Sometimes it's everyone, sometimes it's just the Flash and Supergirl or something doing something, then it's Batwoman and Superman doing something, whatever it might be, but you're not getting Cisco and Iris and whoever it is, from the other shows, like some of the legends showing up. It's very much like 90% the core Justice League characters. Now, of course, you'd have characters like Batwoman and Black Lightning who, from their memories at least, would be new to this style, as they haven't really been in a team like this before, due to Batwoman, of course, being fairly new to the gig, and Black Lightning being on his own Earth previously. You could also even include Superman into that newbies group if you really want to put it as well, because he just would remember Earth 38 stuff, where he just had his cousin, Supergirl. And even then, they didn't really do team-ups all that often. So you could have like a really cool, interesting dynamic there with them getting used to working in a team, but also being new to maybe some of the inner, how like Flash, Supergirl, White Canary, and Martian Manhunter and stuff would be used to working together. They're new to that. In regards to dynamics that I think would have been cool, I've only listed two because they're ones that I think stand out as obvious ones that they could really hone in on. The first one is Superman and Black Lightning. Even though they're in that newbies group, they would also be the most experienced out of the group. Superman's been around for 15 to 18 years or something at that point, and Black Lightning's been around for 20 plus or something, if not more. I can't remember off the top of my head how long Black Lightning had been around as a hero. And sure, they're on their own Earth, now they're in this bigger pond, if you want to put it, but they're still the most experienced of the group. So it'd be interesting to see what that dynamic's like, both as themselves as well as within that group. And the second one ties into that to an extent, and that's like the leadership arguments, maybe leading to issues out in the field. Everyone not knowing who's making the calls and stuff like that. That'd be fairly interesting, which then could put into question Oliver's honor. I think that would have been a very interesting thing to see. Now, the big thing when it comes to a crossover is the villain. Now, I actually have a decent idea who maybe the villain would have been, and then I have two ones which I think would have been interesting to see just for a cool factor and what they could have done with it. The first one is, I just have a feeling this might have been the idea and it's why we saw him show up elsewhere, but that's Despero. Of course, we had the Flash Armageddon event, which is almost like a mini crossover. We had some characters from other shows coming in, and that was sort of to fill in the void of there not being crossover. And it just makes you wonder, was Despero meant to be the villain that was meant to be in this crossover? And maybe that's where the idea came from. I have a feeling it might have been, but he would have been a villain that easily could have worked in this as well. Pretty much what you see in the Armageddon storyline, you can just place in here. And I think it would have worked really, really well. So Despero is one that 100% comes to mind just because we saw how it went in Armageddon, and it makes you wonder if that was rooted in something else that was already planned. The second one is an obvious one, but it's something that I think people would like to see, and that's Legion of Doom. I think it's pretty obvious. Just to see villains of each of these respective Justice League members coming together. Something quick would have been interesting. And also an interesting dynamic around that is that the enemies know their weaknesses potentially. And because this is post-crisis, you can add a post-crisis twist to it. So it doesn't have to be Reverse Flash. That's the Flash member on this. It could be Captain Cold, it could be whoever, it could be Captain Boomerang, whoever it is, but you add a bit of a post-crisis twist to it with each respective thing if we've seen them before. Obviously, if it's someone like Superman, they're using a villain that we haven't seen on Supergirl or anywhere else, you can just do the villain as it is. But if it's a villain that we're used to seeing, you add a post-crisis twist there, and I think it would have been really, really cool. And the third option is one that I think would have been really cool. And just to see visually how they could have done it and you could have had a lot of fun with it. Could have ended up being maybe a bit goofy, Like, potentially some people could have gone, oh, okay, this is a bit silly. But the Queen of Fables. The Queen of Fables can, like, alter reality and ties into the whole, like, Alice in Wonderland sort of aspect thing. And I think you could have done something really fun there. And this could have been maybe where the supporting characters chimed in, and you could have used them and changed them up to play into whatever Queen of Fables was trying to do. That would have been fun. That would have been really fun if they went down there. But if I had to pick one of these three, which I really think would have been the case, it's just Despero, because the Flash used him in that Armageddon thing, and it just feels like that came from somewhere. I might be wrong, but it just feels like that was somewhat in the plans. And the final thing to talk about is, like, of course, as I said, Infinite Earths was the final crossover we got, like proper crossover. So it really makes you wonder, okay, well, if we had this one, did it sound like they were going to slowly build up more? And I don't know what they would have built up to after they did this one, whatever it is. What would the next crossover be? What would the crossover after that be, if that even happened? But a lot of people were wondering if they were ever going to do Crime Syndicate. And sure, the Flash Season 2 dived into, like, elements of Crime Syndicate to an extent, but just with, like, Flash characters. So it would have been very interesting to see, like, Justice League versus Crime Syndicate and seeing what fun they could have had in regards to the casting there. But that's one that I'm like, okay, I think they would have tried to build up to that potentially if they had the time, and, you know, it actually, you know, this follow on from Crisis on Infinite Earths wasn't cancelled. But the Crime Syndicate would have been one that I think would have been really cool to see a few years later down the road. But yeah, guys, thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you'd be awesome, you could drop a like and show support. Let me know in the comment section down below your various opinions on all this stuff. You know, does this crossover sound somewhat interesting? Do you have like a different idea on what you would have wanted to see in this hypothetical follow-on from Crisis on Infinite Earths? Let me know in the comments. And of course, if you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you guys later. Goodbye.